Welcome to the Intelligence Amplifiers, podcast that celebrates the people who make the intelligence a collective superpower. In every episode, we uncover the stories of learning and development leaders who amplify knowledge, break down silos, and empower teams to thrive. These are the enablers of insight, the ones turning expertise into action and shaping the future of work by ensuring that the right knowledge reaches the right people at the right time. So, if you're ready to explore how the intelligence is amplified and shared across organizations, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Intelligence Amplifiers. And today we have Maya Brandel joining us from, I believe you're based in Amsterdam, right?
Stockholm, Sweden.
Got it. Okay, close enough. Close enough, far away from me. So, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And you are currently head of technical learning at Spotify, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you for also having me, Marco. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on the show. I know it took us a little while to get scheduling and everything going with the time zone differences. Before we get into what you do today, which is super interesting to me, I've been observing Spotify for a long time. I wanted to start with your super early career, and it took place in Hong Kong, I believe, and you had a little stint at the startup and then university. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. Hong Kong. I ended up in Hong Kong, I should say, also initially doing some PhD research, and that was a year of studies that I did, after which I realized I'm actually more drawn towards creating solutions than evaluating existing solutions. So that really kind of pushed me towards looking out for companies that were developing learning solutions at the time in Hong Kong. And I started working with a startup which was developing 3D virtual environments for language learning in particular, but learning in general, I would say. So they were using a Second Life kind of technology at the time. I mean, this is a long time ago now. Things have moved on a lot. But I think it was such an incredible experience that really shaped how I approach, I think, learning in terms of technical solutions. So I think that informed a lot of my early experience on like the entire product development lifecycle, working closely with engineers. I mean, as a startup, I think you know how it works. You're in a small team of people, everybody's wearing multiple hats. You get to really see everything from the inside and collaborate very, very closely with engineering, design, product, and see how a product actually is developed. And from the role that I was really participating in this space really was like, how do you translate instructional design practices into a product solution? There was a lot of experimentation, a lot of things, that we tried and see what works. And I think it was a great experience of learning for me. It ended quite abruptly because funding ended, and it did not continue, which was also very useful, I think, learning in the current climate that we're seeing, where things are not as safe and sort of linear anymore. So I learned a lot about how to be aware of your own value and strengths as an instructional designer in this space, and how know what you're bringing to the table as well. So even though it was an experience that sort of ended suddenly, I think I learned a lot about okay, here is what I bring to the table in terms of instructional design practice. Here's how you could actually implement this into a product. And here's how you collaborate with all these different units, like engineering, product design, and so on. So yeah, it was a very insightful experience for me.
Got it. And then you went from startup to an actual academic institution, right? The Hong Kong University of, I believe, Science and Technology,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And how is that? How is that different? I guess going from a small, uncertain organization with sketchy funding to an established institution with lots of sort of policies and procedures, but still focused on education and learning and focused on like high tech learning nonetheless.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it was a very interesting sort of entry space for me. It was probably the best like schooling that I got in instructional design. I was an instructional designer for the Center of Education Innovation there.
Mhm.
Shout out to everybody working there still. They do amazing work on like pushing the boundaries even today of like how does technology sort of fit in higher ed. So I was really kind of hired to support their massive open online courses at the time as an instructional designer. This was kind of the peak of the MOOCs, which is, I think, an interesting wave that we had of education innovation as well. So it was interesting to kind of get to work with so many different subject matter experts from very different fields, very different subject matter, and I think as an instructional designer, sort of finding how you collaborate with your SMEs is so crucial. And also, again, like finding and translating your values as an instructional designer to the experience is something that I learned over time a lot. It was, I mean, it was a tremendous diversity of content. You know, there was like courses around nuclear physics and business and so on. So it was very interestingly environment from creative space. And then also it was also formats. We had blended courses and flipped classroom courses. So there was so much experimentation and some amazing professors that were willing to kind of try different things and see what works and delivers best experience for their learners. So it was, great school for instructional design skills development for me. So yeah.
Yeah, and I remember what was interesting to me was so you were focused on very technical skills, right? So that's one, and you approached it from this like MOOC point of view. So it was very massive online sort of how do we scale this? And it was a lot of that was I remember we talked about it. It was polished content, like you were working on things that were when shipped they were pretty well thought out. They were like high quality, high production kind of learning experiences
Yes. Yeah.
that you did, right? Because it was for the masses at the time.
Yeah, of course. And the reputation of both the professors and instructors that were teaching it, as well as the university, was sort of at stake here. So, I mean, we had, you know, studios and directors when recording videos, you know, very,
Wow.
very different environments. And I think what was also very interesting is like you saw during the MOOC, you know, I think I'm calling it a wave, but, you know, like MOOC, you know, kind of came and it was like a pendulum swinging from like one end where it was like very constrained. You could only join and attend, you know, the space at a particular time, you know, frame, and only certain people can access the content. And then it swung to the completely opposite end where it was like everybody, you can reach all the content at any point you want. It's totally open. And then we saw how also these design structures around learning perform. So you had like on one end, you know, everybody can access content, but then completion was so low that, you know, it showed that there was like a gap. So and then you saw the pendulum kind of reaching the go to middle eventually with creating cohorts of learners and creating interaction and social engagement around having a start and an end date, and all of these principles are things that we get to apply now here as well in my current job. So I think it was an amazing. MOOCs were an amazing experimentation, I think, in instructional design practices, actually, at very large scale, because you got, some incredible numbers. I mean, we've had courses with like 5 million people on them, and then you see like what's the completion rates and how does, small interactions change what happens to the users. So really fascinating. And I feel like sometimes we still forget those learnings in modern products. With every new technology, I feel it's there is like some amount of learning, and I think that it's very important to remember the lessons from like the previous technology, because just because the technology changes, those lessons of how people behave and learn are still more or less the same, actually.
Yeah, and I remember I was also kind of in a learning space back when Coursera had started and so forth, and I remember how MOOCs were touted as the numbers were amazing out of the gate, but to your point, the completion rate, it was just like a huge like drop off. And I'm curious. You mentioned a couple of times how you started experimenting with flipped classroom. How did that play out into like merging this like technology of massive scale, but then flipping it upside down and actually involving cohorts of people and having them kind of move through that experience together? What was the learning there?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to kind of I mean, there are two different things I was gonna say when it comes to flipped classroom. So there was, on one side, there was an experimentation of, as a university, would it make sense to you to use your own MOOC courses as part of the internal curriculum and do it as a flipped classroom where the MOOC content is your lectures, so to say, and when the students come into class, they're with the professor doing actual exercises and engaging fully. And I think that was such a smart, also kind of business model for an institution to kind of get a real good ROIs on spending, high production videos to create and the resources that it takes to deliver a great MOOC. So that's one part I want to say. And I think for other flipped kind of more experiences that we know from like online learning, I think it's not even a question in my head anymore that, if you want to bring people together, you have to have an experience that's an interactive experience. Meaning, if you're going to create a learning where it's a lecture and distribute that, there's no point of getting everybody on a live call or in person, whatever solutions you have. If you're bringing people together, it has to mean that you are creating some kind of engagement between them. That's the way that I kind of think about flipped classroom at this stage also.
Yeah, I always used to kind of compare learning to say fitness, like losing weight or something, right? And or we can also compare it to like music, since you're in that space today, and we'll talk about that. But there's this experience of on one hand you can experience something solo, right? Like I can listen to music by myself, or I can go to a gym by myself, and as we know, yes, that's highly scalable. And on the other hand, it doesn't really work all that great, right? Humans, we're social creatures. So it works much better when we experience things together. Like that's why, if I use fitness as an example, that's why things like yoga or CrossFit work much better than going to a gym solo. using music as an example. That's why it's so much more powerful to go to a dance party or listen to a jam session together as opposed to just experience something solo. So there's this kind of like for me an observation that yes, solo is massively scalable, but not as sticky when you experience it as a cohort. And it sounds like you kind of applied that logic from using MOOCs to kind of like flip them into a cohort experiences as well. And there was that learning.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I mean, I think it's very powerful also when people get to connect with each other, because it activates your emotional like centers, and then information is no longer just sort of like existing in isolation, but it's connected to you with like a feeling or person or whatever else a cohort kind of experience really provides. So yeah, really, really important. I mean, we see it all the time at Spotify, and I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a huge difference between having a course that's completely on demand and people can do it anytime. The number of people that do it anytime is very, very small. And usually those are individuals that are very highly motivated, have like a particular use case for themselves, and that's what drives their motivation. The majority of people, as long as we kind of create a sense of cohort for them, even if there is no real live sessions around the cohort, but there is a beginning, there is an end, there is a Slack channel that provides some support and interactions, it's enough to get them through the experience from the beginning to the end. Even if those experiences are quite long, even if it's like a two-week kind of a learning experience, which is a long time to sustain somebody's motivation generally. So
Yeah, and so let's talk about what Spotify and what you're doing currently. I remember I think Young Family and Life sort of took you from Hong Kong to Sweden, and I also remember your love for music kind of got you to look beyond just academic learning, where things were one way and they were great, and it sounds like a lot of learning and innovation, to technical learning, and nonetheless to the technology company that was a rocket ship sort of growth at the time. How did that happen? How did you end up at Spotify? Why did you pick that as the next stage?
Yeah. Thanks for this question, because I think I also find that it's very interesting when you ask any instructional designer out there or anyone working in our space about their journey, because it differs so much and there are always like very interesting stories to tell. I mean, I think I love the experience working in university and academia. I think I learned a lot, but I was ready to kind of experience more like the real ROIs on what you're doing, because it still felt like you were in this very safe bubble designing trainings for sort of semi-captive audience, and I was very curious to see what that looks like from the business side of things, where things, the amount of time or money are invested on training is really focused on the impact that they can show. So I started looking at like different tech companies that were working in that space, and yes, Spotify was definitely on top of my list, both because like I love the product and I happened to be in Sweden at the time when they launched. So I have been a user since 2007, roughly, which is, many years ago. So it was just like one of those moments where the stars aligned between your professional goals and your personal interest. So that was a great timing, and I joined the tech learning team. So I'm currently the head of an education program manager. They were looking for somebody to develop their machine learning, in particular trainings and backend trainings, but with a strong focus on machine learning because that was the technology kind of incoming at the time as well. So that's how I kind of ended up here. And this was over 6 years ago now. Things have changed so much. I mean, it's incredible, especially in the space of ML, I think, overall. But I think one thing that really struck me initially when I came, and I keep trying to always like remind myself that because I think it's very special coming from academia or anywhere else really, was the strong learning culture that there is at Spotify. And it's not like, I want to say it's not, oh, that's a slogan. We have a great learning culture. I'll give you just a very example of like how that plays out. I mean, learning and teaching, crucially, are part of the STEPS framework for engineers here. And our team, the tech learning team, sits within the platform mission or the internal infrastructure, which I think that you're familiar with as well, because I think that's how things were also set up for you a long time ago. Which means that basically learning is kind of, we're part of the R&D community. I sit with engineers, I'm with my users as well as SMEs every day. And that creates a very sort of collective peer learning structure, which we call collaborative learning because we sort of, we believe that everybody can teach something and learn something, and it's an exchange between people. And that's, I think, a great ethos. I remember when I looked for volunteers for one of the first training I was creating, we had like a basic layout for a intro to backend engineering. I sent a kind of an email to the either, and like I was hoping one or two people will raise a hand and say, yes, I want to contribute to this course creation. And I had over 50 people answering within like 30 minutes. And I was like, I have never seen anything like this before. It was just so new to me. And it continues to amaze me, the amount of willingness to spend time to teach other people and to learn is just, really incredible.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned this at the same time you were doing this at Spotify. I was doing this at Twitter, right? Like I was building Twitter University, and I also came from the outside in, and I was also amazed how willing engineers were to just raise their hand and say, yes, I want to teach a class. Yes, I want to share my knowledge. Yes, I want to help others. And when I say engineers, this is the most senior, like staff engineers, like the highest paid, the smartest people on the planet. They were willing to just stop writing code and actually contributing to others. And also totally independently, right? Like we created very similar models. Like I sat in platform engineering, so very, very low in the stack, but we in engineering reported to essentially a VP of engineering, and it sounds like it was a similar setup at Spotify. We called it peer learning, you called it collaborative learning, but it was essentially the same ethos of like, how do we let 1,000 flowers bloom, right? And also, for me, what was also surprising, because I came from outside where I was developing these polished courses, that were kind of like, we would scale them to, thousands of engineers. Now our universe was it was hundreds of engineers at the time. And it was much more about rapid. So going from something that was polished to something that is good enough, right? Like that was also a big sort of like mindset shift, because we weren't working with professional instructional designers. We were working with the smartest people on the planet who never possibly taught anything before. So what was your experience like going from academia and polished and instructional design professionally to enabling SMEs, subject matter experts, and just kind of like letting those 1,000 flowers bloom and having people just stand up and teach and share themselves? How did that experience work out for you at Spotify? I'm curious.
Yeah. I think this is such a great observation, and it's so true. I mean, it's very fast paced. It's definitely not polished. I leaned, I think, a lot more in my experience when I was in the startup in that space, because we develop trainings very much like products internally. And I'm sure you probably did the same, because you kind of started with like some basic needs analysis on what is necessary. You found a few experts in that field, and you develop maybe just a tiny fraction of what you know is probably necessary, and you got it out already as soon as you could, so that you could gather feedback. Are you on the right track? Collect data, like analyze that as quickly as possible, update the content or change the direction, add more content. So it's it's very interesting, because the training creation, development, design are very much like products now for me. I mean, we treat them literally as products. There is an MVP version, we don't really reach like a kind of GA until like cohort 4, probably. Like you get to see this over time. It's like, yeah, you have to be kind of quick to market. I mean, we even use the language of product, because your users need that skill now. And even if you have 25% of what you know that will be needed, that's still more than zero that they're getting. So that's it's a very, very different environment. It's very fun, I think, because in a way, you could be like, it's a pilot. We know it's not perfect, but as long as you're delivering value to the learners that are there, it's still like worth doing that, and then iterating and evolving over time. And I want to say that iterations continue throughout, because the technology changes. So I mean, a lot of times people ask me like, "Oh, Maya, can you just like record this training?" And I'm like, no, not really, because the moment we record it, 2 weeks later, it's no longer the proper recommendation for what we want people to do, or it's invalid, and we would just be spending our time, re-recording and editing, and that's not the goal. So we definitely, I feel, what I see right now in terms of development, what happens is like you start usually with like a kind of a live virtual version of the course that you have. You collect feedback, and it evolves in terms of format, where it gets to more blended version at some point. So some of the content, if it's something more sort of consistent, that it's not going to change, maybe some conceptual knowledge that is lasting, that you might record and not have to have somebody there deliver that live. But then all the exercises, all of the pieces that are moving, you keep that in the live form, or in a format that's very easy to edit, because you will be updating them every time, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember we used to say perfection is the enemy of good enough.
Yes.
Right. And it was about, I think the gist of it is that you're trying to share knowledge on something that is quite a moving target, right? Like you're trying to explain an internal either tool or process or best practice, but that in itself is constantly changing. So if you were focused on the old way of like having polished learning, to your point, by the time you ship it, it would be obsolete. And the point was more to be like accurate and and timely than to be perfect and polished. Yeah. And I like also what I heard is like the cheapest way to do that was just to stand up a live session, right? And then over time, as the technology matures, and live slowly becomes bottled into something that's maybe blended or maybe even documented and like recorded, and then it becomes sort of a different product and different experience.
Yeah, exactly. very, very true. And I think that it's kind of interesting how the subject matter that we deal in tech is, very transient. Like I always say, like, my job is to eventually make a training obsolete, because then we have done our job. It's like we don't build them with the intention that we will be running forever. That I almost feel is not, a good impact that you have made. If something, I mean, apart from onboarding and things like this, but, like a training has a lifespan. From our perspective, it should reach a certain audience. It should be relevant at a time when most people need it. And after that, you can decide to either just completely sunset it or reformat it so that people can at least maybe access some of the nuggets of wisdom in there. But yeah, it's very fast.
Yeah.
Move.
And I just wanted to, I think you mentioned something very interesting. Like it wasn't training for the purpose of training. Like it was training as a means to an end.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I remember we hosted a couple of co-workers in the past at TechnoCon, and we talked about where your role sits at Spotify. And it was very much about innovation. It was about unlocking innovation of the engineers. And also what I found fascinating and very similar to my experience at Twitter is that I sat right next to tech docs. So training is just one tool in my toolbox. I had other tools. I could also focus on documentation. I also had open source in some other teams like that. So to your point, it wasn't about training. It was about unlocking engineers to do their best work, be the most innovative, and so forth. So can you maybe speak to that? Like how do you think about training and documentation and everything else that collectively enables engineers to do their best work, I guess?
Yeah. No, and it's so true. I mean, we sit also very close to Tech Docs. We have also a sister team that maintains an internal platform for skill exchange. It's called Skill Exchange plugin for Backstage. I'll backtrack a little bit. So Backstage is our internal developer platform. It's open source. I think a few people out there hopefully have heard of it. Skill Exchange is a plugin to that platform that was created by a sister team to us who also owns our Tech Docs. They're an engineering team. We always say that we have the same goals with them, unblocking engineers. We just have different means of doing that. One is through more technical solutions, one is through training solutions. And I think it's also really important that, and I think you've, from what I know about your work also at Twitter, you've also had to kind of create an internal tool to be where engineers are. Because that was also very, very early on when I joined Spotify. We moved directly on Backstage all of our communication, information, training, enrollment and things like that, because you want to be where your users are. You don't want to sort of live outside the ecosystem of where developers are. So that was something that happened for us very, very early on, and it really helps, I think, to kind of make it easy for users to reach you and know find information, but also link those different solutions. So, if, for example, a tech doc can directly send you to a training because maybe the tech doc is not good enough to unblock you at that stage. Because maybe it's not about just getting the information right, but it's about like some kind of a skill that you need a bit more depth in, and things like that. So I think that it's a very important thing to know that training is not a solution to everything, and different problems need different solutions. Sometimes it could be just better technical documentation. Sometimes it could be better communication. It could be just an information sort of challenge, and sometimes it is practice also. new habit formation, which I think it's something that, especially in the space of AI for productivity right now, I see this. It's a challenge because we're kind of trying to change people's habits. It's not a difficult skill to learn to use the AI tools available to people, but it's pushing them to change their workflows, and that is not such an easy thing to do, actually. And I think that's an interesting kind of space to consider in terms of like solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you brought a good point. I remember like when I joined Twitter and when we were in parallel doing the same thing, we had hundreds of these classes, and we had tens of thousands of documents and everything, and we needed a system, and we looked at LMSs, and we were like, well, engineers never go to an LMS. They just like there was a zero usage of an LMS, so we ended up building our own platform or two internally, and ultimately that's what I ended up spinning out into plus. That's what plus is, how it came about. It was this insight that engineers do not use standard learning systems. We needed to build something and that was purpose built. And I want to go back to just you mentioned training versus documentation, and I always used to think about, like, sometimes people want to learn how to fish, and sometimes they just want to be given fish, right? Like you right? You're in a flow of work, you're building that service, and you're like, how do I do X? And you're like, you just want the answer to pop up right there. But sometimes you don't even know which, like what you don't know what you don't know, and that's where learning is a better tool. It's more about like this conceptual sort of understanding, like, hey, we have 5 different databases available to you. Which one do you use in which case? It's not about how do I do it with this one, but it's like, which one do I even consider, for example, right? And it was this difference between just unblocking them in the flow of work versus taking a step back and giving them sort of like a bigger picture understanding of the lay of the land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there is. I think of. I think I read this somewhere, so it's not a novel idea that I created, but I think about the difference between training and documentation in a way as like how you read a recipe, and you could read a recipe and you can perform all the steps, and you get a nice dish out of it. But out of reading this recipe, you may not be able to transfer your skills to another recipe. Can you now, without like using this recipe, know how to, I don't know, you've learned to make one type of bread, say in this recipe, can you use these skills to now make another type of bread? And I think that's really where training kind of comes in from my perspective, because it's not just teaching you how to do one thing, but it's teaching you how to like do this one thing and also understand how to abstract a level so that you could transfer those skill sets to a completely different context that you may never have seen before, but still be able to succeed. So that's the way that I probably think about this. But I also want to throw in one other thing in here, which I was thinking about when you sort of gave the example.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting also within our product area at the moment. We have a third team that is, so we have as I said, like the platform for skill exchange and tech docs. And we have a third team that joined us just about a year ago, who is our internal knowledge system using AI. We call it ICA. And it's very interesting, again, how all these teams intersect, because it's about internal knowledge. Again, they're solving for the kind of questions like, which database should I use for this type of problem that I'm solving, and that is contained in technical documentation, in different Slack support channels, and they bring this sort of internal knowledge, very much like just-in-time answers to very, very specific internal questions that you wouldn't be able to find externally, because you have a restriction of like what is the golden technology to use for that. So I think it's very interesting how all of these teams that work with different solutions are kind of solving still for the same problem, which is unblocking engineers to do the best work that they can, really.
Yeah. We ended up doing something similar. I launched a team that was building basically a federated search. This is a decade ago, and I think now everyone is doing that. But the insight was, to your point, how do I unblock somebody in the flow of work? So if somebody is coding something and I just want to find a solution, that answer could be, yeah, there could be a live course on that. It could be a recording of a live course, like so some video recording of that. It could be and we had the biggest Confluence installation on the planet at the time. So it could be in our wiki. It could be in our code base, in one of the gazillion repos, or a mono repo, or a review board, or a Google Doc. So basically you had this like universe of like knowledge internally that was, and it was very unique knowledge, things you couldn't Google, right? And we did try internal Google, and it just doesn't work because you don't have the signal. So we ended up building our own sort of like federated search, and obviously this was a decade plus ago. So now everyone is doing that. The products like Glean and so on that are sort of like bringing everything together. And also what I'm noticing is a lot of technology companies are building their own AI agents on top of that. So it's not just like, hey, here's like all this federated knowledge, but there's also now agent AI available to you in that. And it tends to be plugged in right in the flow of work. So your IDE may have all this kind of like baked in. And so that's why I'm seeing kind of like the puck going. I'm super curious, like, what are you excited about? Like, it sounds like you're working with AI a lot, and obviously Spotify is at the cutting edge of like all this stuff. What are you excited about? Like, where's the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's all agents for sure around us. I think it's very interesting, and I love the fact that learning sits next to these type of developments right now, because we get to really feed the information that we sort of have on through training and best practices and so on. I'm definitely excited about the developments that are going to come in the space of agents, and I'm very curious how that's going to change how it will work. And I think that that's a question that we don't have really an answer yet. And what would it mean to be an engineer? What would it mean to be a product manager? I mean, just over lunch today, some of my colleagues were discussing and debating this, which I was, it's amazing to have these type of conversations, because I think that it is going to change the nature of our work, and the way that we sort of plan and execute our work is going to change drastically. I still think that the kind of skills, the high level skills that we have been learning through all this time will come very, very useful, because it's still fundamentally you're, again, transferring one skill set to a different context, and different tools. So I'm one of the optimists where I'm like, I don't see AI as like, or agents as taking our jobs. I think it will change how we work. And I'm very hopeful that we can build really good learning solutions that like are actually helpful. I try to stay away from, the craze of content creation, because I don't know, like I think in the AI space and education right now, there's so many solutions of content creation, and some of them have like really good merits for sure. But as an instructional designer, kind of work in this space, I feel engagement is a much more interesting problem than content. And it has been for a while. So I'm kind of curious to see what AI technologies will work on the engagement problem more than the content problem. So yeah, I think it's definitely fast evolving, very, very interesting space. We'll see where it leads us.
Yeah, you're right about that. So I talk to a lot of like learning and development leaders, right? And I always ask, like, hey, what are you excited about? And like 99% of the answers is AI. But then when you kind of unpack it, well, what are you excited about AI? You sort of, on one hand, there's sort of like this thinking of like, well, we create a lot of content, so AI is going to help us create a lot more content a lot faster. And that's kind of like that, sort of like, garbage in, garbage out. I want a faster horse kind of answer to, Ford's question of like, what, if you ask customers what do they want, they just want a faster horse. So that's kind of like one way of thinking. And then there's this other way of thinking, which is we don't know, but it's going to be something totally different. And even the interface, like what we are used to, like, oh, go to some web app and like type in a question. I'm seeing even that disappear in favor of like, just meet me where I'm at. Like I'm in the flow of work. I'm just coding. I need some help right there. And so I like this approach of like, we don't know, and it's a super curious insight. And also one thing that you mentioned, I just want to kind of repeat because I think it's important. You said over lunch with your colleagues today, and I just want to kind of highlight the importance of this, like where you sit in the organization, first of all. So you're very embedded in with your user base, as opposed to sitting on a side in HR and so forth. So that's one. You're sitting with your customers, internal customers. One. And two, there's this sidebar conversations where you actually learn what they need, and it happens over lunch. Like I remember, like my best input was like I would have early morning breakfast with the staff engineers at Twitter, and it was just totally informal. We were just shooting, like throwing ideas at one another. But I got the most insights during those informal breakfast conversations that happen in person. So I just wanted to kind of kind of regurgitate that back at you because I think it's an important observation in the world of AI and how you get informed what to build next.
Yeah. No, I think that it's such a key value to tech learning at Spotify is that we are surrounded by our users all the time, and we are part of our users as well. So it's kind of a very interesting sense of like you are part of the community you serve, and you are, you're just an amplifier to their needs and the solutions that they also come up with, because a lot of the time they themselves, a lot of trainings are grassroots. There's a lot of like, somebody's like, oh, I ran a small workshop, Maya, what do you think about that? And it's like, then it becomes, a 3-day course, and it's amazing what power communities have, as long as learning is really encouraged, and kind of supported for a company organization. I think that has such an incredible value for people.
When we were thinking about this show, right, and what we call it, we started thinking about this in the world of AI. There's this also the world of collective intelligence, the intelligence of the organization, the intelligence of the people, right, engineers in this particular case. And you said, well, you are the amplifier of that. So that's why we actually call this show Intelligence Amplifiers, because people like you, that's exactly what you do. You kind of like, you take this intelligence of the humans that work there, the human capital, and then you amplify it to the organization. So that it's just a little nod to the name of the show and how it came about. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, I think it's exactly what actually happens in practice. So I think the name really describes the function very, very well indeed. So it makes
That's
a lot.
awesome. One final question, because I know you're also busy with you have a hack week going on and a bunch of other things. One final question: looking back at your career, how you started. You started with a startup, then you went to academia, and then you ended up in technical learning. And you're looking at learning beyond learning, but more like how do we holistically serve engineers to do their best work. Like looking back, what would be a piece of advice you would give to a younger Maya starting out?
I think one thing growing up would have been probably useful to know is that it's okay not to kind of have a career plan as you start, and remain very curious, and have a next step. But you don't have to have all the steps kind of figured out along the way, because the moment you sort of move one step forward, that opens a lot of different opportunities, and it may change your mind, and your curiosity will lead you forward. So I've learned to follow my curiosity a lot more than I used to, and to see it as an advantage. I think for a lot of instructional designers, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel because we love learning, it's very hard earlier on in your career to kind of know what your focus is, because like almost everything you lift, you're like, oh wow, that's an amazing thing, and you go down that rabbit hole. And I still am like this a lot with a lot of things, because I have a very curious mind, but I appreciate it now. I think back then I was like, oh, I'm just like losing focus. But I think curiosity in itself is a very, very powerful intuition into what you're passionate about, what is interesting, and yeah, you should follow that more, in even in your career sort of decisions. That's my, I would say, gist for my 10-year-old Maya.
Got it. So stay curious, follow your intuition, and it will ultimately lead you to your passion. Yeah, I love it. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate hearing your story, Maya. And yeah, great to have you on the episode.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. It's been a pleasure, really. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Talk soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of the Intelligence Amplifiers. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on the future episodes. And if you're interested in being a guest or have a question, check out the episode description for how to reach us. Also, don't forget to check out Plus Plus, the platform that makes collective intelligence at scale possible. Find out more at plusplus.co. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep amplifying.